Okay, so good afternoon. Welcome everybody to this webinar event. So the event is entitled R2P at the Borders, Europe's Responsibility to People Seeking Safety. So thank you very much for coming along, wherever you're calling in from. So this is the latest in a series of events co-hosted by Protection Approaches and the European Centre for the Responsibility to Protect, based at the University of Leeds. And the series is focused on the relationship between Europe and the responsibility to protect. And the series seeks to bring together leaders from policy, academia, and practice to assess European commitments to protect populations from mass atrocity crimes. So the previous events have covered topics such as the integration of the responsibility to protect in national policy, and also Europe's responsibility to the people of Myanmar. And these sessions are available on Protection Approaches YouTube channel, and I think a link will be shared during this session as well. So today we're adding to these conversations by focusing on European responsibilities to protect refugees. So I'll just briefly start by introducing myself. So my name's James Souter. I'm a lecturer in the School of Politics and International Studies at the University of Leeds in the UK. So I work within the area of contemporary political theory, but I've written on the topic of state responsibilities to refugees. And also in the past, I've written about the relationship between the responsibility to protect and asylum and refugee protection. So this event today is a informal conversation. There is a Q&A box, so we're inviting you to post any questions that you might have throughout the session. We'll have to see how we do for time. Hopefully we'll have a chance to respond to at least a few of the questions that you post towards the end of this session. So just in terms of general housekeeping, the event is being recorded, and like the previous sessions, it is going to be posted on Protection Approaches YouTube channel. If you're a Twitter user, then you can find Protection Approaches using @IBVPrev, so PREV, and you can find the European Centre for the Responsibility to Protect using @ECR2P. And if you'd like to tweet and share the insights from our speakers and the discussion today, then you can use the hashtag R2P Europe. So we're really delighted to be collaborating with Protection Approaches again for this session. And now I'd like to introduce and welcome our panelists for today. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Ambassador Blanka Jamnišek. So Blanka is an ambassador for Slovenia, and works in the Human Rights Department. So in 2015, Blanka was appointed by the government of Slovenia as the national contact point for the responsibility to protect. And she currently serves as a member of the steering group within the global R2P focal points network. And Blanka is also the deputy head of the Slovenian delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which promotes education and research and remembrance. So welcome, Blanka. Secondly, I'd like to welcome Nazek Ramadan. So Nazek is the Executive Director of Migrant Voice. She has over 30 years experience working with migrants, refugees and asylum seekers, as well as ethnic minorities in the UK and Europe, focusing on promoting their voice and their representation in the media and on various policy platforms. And then finally, happy to welcome Jens Stappenbeck. So Jens is the Executive Director of Genocide Alert, which is a German human rights organisation focusing on mass atrocity prevention. And Jens also researches practices of early warning at the Peace Research Institute in Frankfurt, and he works as a consultant and a super forecaster with Good Judgment Inc. So we're really excited to have the three of you here as our speakers and to hear your insights and comments on this topic. So what I'll do before we open the discussion up is just start with a few brief kind of framing remarks about this topic. So I suppose the first observation that I have when thinking about this topic is that Europe's response to refugees can be seen as being marked by kind of two quite contradictory trends. So on the one hand, we have a plethora of ethical and legal norms around human rights that European states have signed up to. But on the other hand, we have a trend in recent years where there's significant public opposition to the welcoming of refugees across European states, which can be seen to be reflected within various populist policies. So these two aspects of Europe's stance on refugees and migrants, don't seem to sit easily together that well. So I think this kind of almost paradox is something that we need to grapple with when we're thinking about Europe's responsibilities towards refugees and migrants. Another sort of point that I wanted to raise that perhaps we can follow up with in the rest of the discussion is the relationship between the responsibility to protect, or R2P framework, and refugee protection and Europe's responsibilities to refugees. So I'm sure many of you will already be aware of the R2P framework. So an agreement where all states in 2005 recognized that they have a responsibility to protect populations from 4 mass atrocity crimes, so genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And I think it's fair to say that states have traditionally seen the R2P as a foreign policy issue. So they've generally seen it as something that they do somewhere else in relation to atrocities committed by somebody else. So the implications of the responsibility to protect for their own protection of refugees has been less recognized. But a number of academics and commentators in recent years have argued that the R2P has obvious implications for refugee protection. So first of all, many, if not most, refugees flee the 4 atrocity crimes that R2P covers, and they've argued that asylum is a clear and even an obvious response as a way of protecting refugees from those atrocity crimes. So, I've tried to make this argument in some of my writing before, many others have as well, that there's a case to try to bring R2P home, as it were. So arguing that there's a need for an inward-looking approach to R2P, seeing the implications for refugee protection policies just as much as there's a need to look outwards to responses that can be made in other parts of the world. And then one final point that I wanted to make is that it's not necessarily the case that European states are just simply failing to see the connections between R2P and refugee protection. It's also sometimes the case that Western states may directly violate their commitments to R2P in their treatment of refugees and migrants. So this argument has been recently made in relation to the former Trump administration's treatment of refugees on the US-Mexico border. So it's been argued that this can be seen as constituting a mass atrocity crime in itself. So potentially that kind of argument might be applicable to some practices that we find within Europe. It's conceivable that some of the ways in which European states treat refugees and migrants could itself constitute an atrocity that falls within R2P. So I think that's enough from me by way of kind of introductory framing remarks. So without further ado, I'd like to open the floor to our panelists and get their thoughts on this. So as a kind of first general question, I'm interested in to hear what you think about what Europe's responsibilities to people seeking and having received sanctuary are, and whether you think European governments and organisations are meeting these responsibilities. So perhaps I could invite Nazek to start us off. So we know that you've worked both within UK and Europe. So be interested to start off by hearing your thoughts.
Thank you. I guess what I'd like to bring is how we as migrants are feeling. Where are we at the receiving end? Migrant Voice will also member of a network, European migrant refugee-led network called RISE Network. We operate in 17 EU countries. And at this moment, we are all, we feel that migrants, asylum seeking refugees, especially for talking about asylum seeking refugees in Europe, they are in a dire situation. There are people dying at borders needlessly. People being, almost prevented from applying for asylum. All those barriers put in front of them. People are being made destitute, detained, deported, disbelieved. Even now, as we see the situation in Afghanistan, the humanitarian situation unfolds, we're hearing from EU leaders, the leadership, that the messages they're sending out to Afghans: do not come to Europe. And they still insisting on we will deport Afghan nationals back, even though now they think they may not deport them to Afghanistan. They will probably deport them to neighboring countries where they're happy to invest money, maybe to set up reception centers and send them back there. It's beyond belief. At the moment, there are so many Afghan nationals who've been in Europe for a long time, and including in the UK. Until very recently, UK was still detaining and deporting Afghan nationals. I think now this is put on hold. Never mind those who are fleeing at the moment. I think the way asylum seekers are treated in Europe is not compatible with European values. For example, if you look at Greece, it's almost impossible to apply for asylum in Greece, because if you come, let's say, across through Turkey, just for this reason only, you are turned back immediately. There's nothing in international conventions that says, that puts conditions on how you can reach a country to seek asylum. You just reach that country, but you're outside your, country of birth, and etc. There are other conditions. There's nothing that says you shouldn't, cross through Turkey. So just for that reason, you can't even apply for asylum. And you're sent back. And there are so many asylum seekers at the moment within Europe who are destitute, who are homeless, who are struggling, who are suffering, who are terrified. And you could live, and who some of them might go underground and live, for years and years in hardship and struggle within Europe. I guess because Europe is not, implementing those treaties, international conventions, including the European one, that they have created or that they are a signatory of. So the situation on the ground is really dire, is bad. We just watch in horror how European countries are very happy to invest millions of pounds and euros in building fences and walls and barbed wires, rather than supporting those people who are in desperate need for our protections. We almost don't see them as a human being. We don't see asylum seekers as a human being. In UK, there's a new proposed nationality and border bill that suggesting that asylum seekers will be processed abroad. We'll take them to Africa and process them there or elsewhere in the world. It's like human beings are treated like furniture, like pieces of furniture, like commodities. We don't see these people as human beings. And there's increased if you want a populist narrative coming from EU leaders. I mean, a few years back when Syrians fled the war in Syria, started to come to Europe. I mean, we saw in country, for example, like Hungary, people were caged, put human beings, they are families, the men, the women, the teacher, the doctors, the mothers, the fathers, they are actually put in cages. I mean, this is how we treat asylum seekers and refugees in Europe. I think, this is, as I said, this is, goes against what Europe stands for. And I think it's time Europe actually treat those people as human beings who have rights, and they can, exercise their rights under international treaties to seek safety. And, Europe is, we're a role model for the rest of the world. And we need to lead on how actually we treat people who come to us, who become vulnerable, rather than the pushbacks and let them drown at seas and die at borders and invest a lot of money in barbed wires, while actually almost eliminating legal routes. We're not providing legal routes for people to come and seek safety and sanctuary.
Great, thanks very much, Nazek. That's a really powerful set of kind of examples of the kind of disconnect between Europe's stated responsibilities and commitments and actual practices that we see on the ground. So thanks very much for that. Blanca, could we turn to your reflections on this question? Oh, I think you're muted, Blanca.
Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. Dear colleagues, I would like to first express my gratitude to the organizers of this conference, where we can exchange views and practices to advance the implementation of responsibility to protect, which is a normative principle that sees the state as the primary responsible for the protection of populations on its territory, including people seeking or having received sanctuary. So what Nazek was talking about just now means that we are in Europe also responsible for people who reach Europe. And of course, other states and the international community also have protection responsibilities, also by assisting states that cannot effectively do so. So it's also on the routes towards Europe. There's a lot of responsibility we're talking about, and we're seeing that the reality is really, really bad for very many people. EU recommendations on promoting and operationalizing the responsibility to protect by the EU and EU member states have been agreed on 17 June 2020. It's a living document, but those recommendations are really important. They are aimed at further advancing and acceptance of the operationalization of the concept of R2P with a view to strengthen the relevance of responsibility to protect and its tools in the light of the applicable international law. As part of operationalizing R2P's Pillar 1, the EU and EU member states will keep encouraging R2P's links to internal dimension of EU and EU member states policies with regard to harmful developments like targeting of minorities, hate speech, and incitement to hatred and discrimination, especially of vulnerable groups, as well as policies promoting gender equality and the empowerment of women. So here we are talking about the internal dimension, not only external as has been foreseen before. The EU and EU member states will encourage discussions of these issues and of potential response from an R2P perspective with national and international stakeholders, and include these into relevant EU and national reporting and documentations. So this is written in the document I was just talking about. In addition, there is an EEAS R2P atrocity prevention toolkit, which is a concrete step towards integrating R2P into relevant activities of EU delegations and other actors. The EU and EU member states also continue facilitating dialogue on and engagement with R2P in the UN context. I mean here the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, groups of friends in New York and Geneva, UN Security Council area formula meetings with the UN Secretariat, including the Office of Special Advisors of R2P, and also genocide prevention. So there's a lot of work being done, but it needs to translate to the realities on the ground. If I talk just a few minutes, a few words about the situation in Slovenia, in the country where I come from, concerning the legal framework in Slovenia, assistance and care for applicants for international protection is regulated in the legislation. The vulnerable asylum seekers, including women, have scope of rights that are foreseen in international law. All children and adolescents up to 18 years have equal rights as children. Here I mean education and healthcare. This has proved to be a good practice because it's much easier to integrate and provide assistance such as safe accommodation and other specialized assistance. And I will talk about some of the good practices later. To end the answer to this question, I would say that just as the 1948 Universal Declaration on Human Rights remains relevant despite failure to prevent continued abuses of human rights around the world, so too does the R2P norm from 2005 continue to be of fundamental importance. What is critically necessary is for it to evolve with ever more effective application in the real world environment, including for people on the move who are fleeing human rights abuses and mass atrocities. Thank you.
Thank you, Blanca. That's a really helpful overview, and interesting to hear that in recent agreements this internal aspect of R2P has been kind of more recognised. So
yes,
thank you very much. Should we turn to Jens and have your opening reflections on this question?
Yes, thanks. First of all, also for me, thanks for hosting the series on R2P, and thanks for inviting me. I think that I'm just going to add a bit to the very inspiring and interesting answers from Blanca and Nacek, with regard maybe first to the link between R2P and refugee protection, which I think has often been either missed completely or has been criticized, for example, because R2P has a lot of times, and is still a lot of times, equalized with military intervention. So refugee protection on the one hand, and R2P or military intervention on the other hand don't go quite well together. But of course, as Blanca has already pointed out, that is changing in the European Union. That's changing in the documents. That's very noteworthy, I guess. Also the need to, or the necessity to reframe this, or to put attention on the internal dimension of R2P is vital when it comes to protection of refugees inside the European Union, but also outside. So I agree with what has been said, and might also, maybe stress a point that also Nacek made, that R2P or protection of refugees should apply, of course, not only for people considered as refugees in Europe and inside the European Union already, but of course also for migrants and asylum seekers that are on the way to enter, for example, the European Union, regardless of whether they have actual chances of recognition or not. So forceful pushbacks against people in the Mediterranean Sea, for example, or in the border region of Greece and Turkey are immoral and illegal, I would say. So we have a responsibility to protect people that come here to seek asylum and give them a fair hearing, and also to grant it to them if they are being, for example, politically persecuted in their home states. And especially with respect to Germany, I'm going to talk about Germany for a second here, as you can hear by my accent, that I am German. Right, Germany has been hated or demonized, depending on where you stand, for its role in 2015, obviously. But from a human rights perspective, you could say that we did a good job, or at least an okay job, then, right? And it has often been, however, portrayed that Angela Merkel opened the borders and invited refugees in, but I just want to stress that that's like actually not true. Like factually, we are part of the Schengen area, so our borders have always been open. She just did not close them. Germany was like one of the states in the Schengen area that lived up to its responsibilities, and I think that the discussion has been framed in the sense that we opened the borders while we just did what was kind of expected. Shows that we in the European Union are not really in a perfect state when it comes to fulfilling our responsibilities. Asylum seeking procedures are taking too long. The process is kind of intransparent in the European Union. Also the idea that you have to stay in a state where you got to get registered first is kind of ludicrous to me. I mean, just as Nacek also just reported, I also met a lot of refugees in Berlin, and while I feel there's no time for a lot of personal stories here, but there's just a lot going wrong with the processes. For example, if you consider that relatives may already live in other European states, or that there existing language skills that might be useful in some European states, but maybe not in Italy or Greece. So overall, I think that there's a lot of need to reform asylum law and procedures in Europe. And then there's also, with regard to R2P, of course, two things I want to stress before I run out of time now, is the protection of migrants and asylum seekers in hosting countries, of course. It's really painful to see that people who fled mass atrocities or identity-based violence, and actually after having survived the horrors of their flight and successfully escaped the horrors in their home states, then face new identity-based violence in Europe again. They're just horrific. There are many instances where we as Europeans are failing to fulfill our responsibilities to protect these people here. So that's why the inward perspective is vital when it comes to R2P. And second, I want to stress that, I mean, the whole procedure of getting to file for asylum in Europe is very, very painful. It's a painful journey. Nacek elaborated on this already, but we invested in new barriers on the Balkan route. We have the EU treaty with Turkey, a regime that itself is violating human rights law, and we used to tolerate militia groups in Libya so that they do restrict the number of refugees that make it here. And sometimes it seems like we invest more into protection of our borders than in protecting people. So I'm going to stop here, but yeah, that's for now what's going wrong.
Great, thank you very much. That's a really interesting series of points. I mean, I think your remarks about Germany are interesting. It raises the question of how are we to assess, the performance of Germany in response to refugees sort of in 2015 and since then. I suppose, given the numbers that were admitted, it's easy in comparison to other European states just to kind of be quite sort of celebratory. But I think you're right to sort of, also point to, potential imperfections and problems in the treatment of refugees in Germany as well. So thank you for that. I now wanted to give each of you a chance to talk more specifically about the different areas that you focus on in your work. So perhaps if I could return to Nacek, So, you're the director of Migrant Voice, which is a UK-based organisation. I'd be interested to hear more about kind of the current situations that refugees and migrants, specifically in the UK, are facing, and who you encounter in your own work.
Thank you. I mean, my organization actually set up in a way to respond to the situation. In 2010, just before the general election in UK, the debate on migration became even more toxic. It's been toxic and negative for a long time, but at that time, it really became too much for us. It was impacting more on our lives directly. Everyone, all the contenders, all the political leaders were competing to show who's the hardest, who's the toughest on migration, and migrants were blamed for everything. Actually, in UK, migration was presented as one of the three main concerns for UK, alongside the NHS and the financial crisis in 2010. I mean, this is how bad things were. And then, of course, when politicians speak this way about migrants and migration, and they're not challenged, the people on the street will translate this, will interpret this in a way physically against us. So we saw this an increase in racial attacks, verbal and physical attacks on migrants, or people even who looked like migrants who are not migrants necessarily. So this is where we came from. We felt, we as migrants, we need to speak for ourselves. We need to challenge. We need to tell politicians, no, we're not problem. We are the reason you are not in a much worse situation, because we contribute to the economy. We fill jobs. I mean, so we felt we need to speak for ourselves, and we need to do something, because after all, this is our home. This is where we live, and this is where we belong at the moment. But the UK situation is, again, similar to other European countries. I think for many years in UK, we have one of our former prime ministers created what's called the hostile environment, what people might hear about it in the news. And this is where the government decided to make life unbearable for migrants so they can leave the country and send the message abroad, you're not welcome here, we'll make you suffer, we'll make you struggle. And at one stage, they probably regretted doing that. They have vans going around the roads, go home vans, telling people, undocumented migrants to leave, to leave the country, or they'll be deported and arrested and all that. So this actually created lots of, sentiment feelings from established migrants, from like someone like myself. I felt so insulted by this. So I think this is probably the one thing they regretted. But things haven't improved since then. There are new restrictions all the time against migrants, especially against asylum seekers and refugees. We're putting more and more. It's harder for an asylum seeker to claim asylum. It's in the UK. There are almost no legal routes to apply. And now there's a new proposal for a new bill. The UK is right now presented in Parliament, which makes it, which criminalize you if you make your own way to the UK to claim asylum. If they don't bring you from somewhere, from a camp around the world themselves, if you make your own way, if you have agency and you decide, to do what any human beings would do to save their lives and their families. If you come to the UK to claim asylum, you could be criminalized. You could be sent to prison for up to 4 years. And, there are all these talks about sending people to process their applications in other parts of Europe or in Africa. I mean, this is where we are at the moment. Now, UK, we place asylum seekers in disused military barracks in terrible conditions. A large number of people together, they can't protect themselves from COVID. I mean, we place them, asylum seekers in UK are not allowed to work, but they are forced to live below the poverty line. We only give them a small amount. And many of them are placed in substandard accommodation and really poor accommodations. So life is hard. I think if you think, fled your country and you've been through hell and back, the minute you arrive to UK, your suffering doesn't end. Actually, you have a new struggle, a new hardship to experience, which is, I mean, it shouldn't be this way. So I think we're still detaining people, we're still deporting people, and we present migration as a problem. And I mean, just to put things in context, UK takes the smallest number of asylum seekers in Europe. A way small number, but the way they speak about it, you think, the country is flooding, is overwhelmed, and we're taking everyone around the world is coming to the UK, which is not the case. I think, we have a lot of challenges as migrants to speak for ourselves, to speak up. I mean, at the moment, in UK, there are over 1 million undocumented migrants. And you never hear politicians discussing this or saying, we need to address this. They can't just detain and deport everyone. It will take them 50 or more years. It will cost them billions of years. No one is talking about, we have those human beings, actually, they've been living in the country for many years. Maybe it's about time to talk about them, to try actually to get them out of the shadow, to regularize the status. But there's no mention of that. All the mention is, we want to deport you, we don't want to kick you out, and etc. But even if you get status in UK, as asylum seeker get status, you know, it will take you years. You have to wait a long time, of course. And once you are accepted, it will cost you thousands and thousands of pounds to regularize your status. Because in the UK, we charge a lot of money for anyone who's applying for indefinite leave to remain, or applying for citizenship, or applying for whatever. We pay, in some applications, they're like 20 times or more than people pay in France or Germany. So again, we take people through a longer process. They spend longer, many more years than other similar countries going through processes, but we also pay thousands and thousands of pounds just to stay and to live in the UK. So the situation for us here is not, you know, is not great, and we have lots of challenges to address. But the latest bill, if approved, this bill would actually, you know, break international laws, because you can't criminalize someone just for trying to save their lives and turning up at your door. There's nothing in international conventions that tells you this is how you claim asylum. You must come on an airplane with a visa and tickets. I mean, you know, it's sad. And why would you want to send people to other countries, process them? I mean, again, it's just dehumanizing people who need protection, and talking about them as they are, you know, their problem, there are risks, there are, you know, also there are talks in UK about pushbacks. The government is trying actually to push the boats back, people who try to come from Calais, push them back at sea to go back to France. I mean, if you want to, you know, Calais is a big problem. If you want to see, you know, one clear example how Europe is treating asylum seekers, you should go to Calais and see. A few years back, I went to Calais myself a few times, and I spoke to migrants there, and I've seen the conditions people, including children, young children, live in, the squalors they live in. You wouldn't think this is Europe. And remember, there's no man's land in Europe. I mean, this is Europe, and people are at the heart of Europe. And all what France and UK did is, you know, investing millions in securitization and walls and barbed wires you know, all this talk. People, you're talking about people like football, kicking the football from one place to another. I think, you know, Europe needs to change, UK as well as Europe. We need to change the way we see those people. Those are human beings who need protection and who turn up at our doors. How should we treat them? I think this is what the discussion should be. It's not about numbers. It's not about, you know, try to please the populist narrative and the far right and all that. It's really about, for change, treat those people as the people they are, the human beings who are in desperate situation. They need protection, safety, and they are actually in our country or at our border. How should we treat them? I think this is what should be the direction of travel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's the UK perspective. If we now shift over to Blanca and the situation in Slovenia. So I'm interested in finding out more about what individual states like Slovenia are doing to meet their responsibilities to protect towards migrants and refugees, and also what improvements could be made in this. So are there any kind of more specific practices that you might be willing to share with us on that?
Well, I personally definitely believe a human rights-based approach to everyone, including refugees, asylum seekers, is a base for everything we do. So as an R2P focal point for my country since 2015, I see my primary role to build awareness on the need to fulfill this political commitment. Therefore, I will share a few practices from my country to contribute to effective prevention and possibly effective reaction to processes that are harmful and can, in some circumstances, lead to mass atrocities, which should be prevented, of course. So after I was appointed, I decided to do some awareness-raising events on the basis of the then new framework of analysis for atrocity crimes, a tool of prevention, which was issued by this Office of Special Representatives. And so in 2015 and 16, Our translation service translated it into our own language upon my request. I think teaching about human rights-based approach is very important to do in your own language to reach different audiences. And in this particular case, it was not an easy translation, as some terms had to be defined anew and rechecked with legal experts, for instance, in the Ministry of Justice, at the law faculty, and also the civil society. I tried, I'm not a lawyer, but I tried to coordinate this process, which eventually led to the result that we now use the same terminology. And then I did, on the basis of this translation of a document, which shows the risks and triggers and framework of all these processes that can lead to mass atrocities, processes that should be prevented. I initiated awareness-raising events, about 4 to 5 yearly, before the COVID pandemic. They were all physical, of course, by, for instance, observing the Human Rights Day, the International Day of Remembrance of Victims of Genocide, the Holocaust Day. Then we also have a Festival of Tolerance. Then I was invited to give lectures for students of different faculties. And these events were not only in the capital, not only in Ljubljana, but also in other cities. We are a small country, 2 million people, but still I thought that it's important to reach out also out of the capital, and I was always trying to include on these different events. So, for instance, survivors of mass atrocities from Second World War, academics with different expertise, the civil society, NGOs, and so on, including refugees. And the target groups on these events were mostly young generations, academics, but also public at large. Unfortunately, after the lockdowns, we haven't been able to do this online, because there has to be, in my opinion, there really has to be physical attendance to be able to talk about these emotional issues also. You know, these are people, as Nazek was saying, and they should be treated as people, and we have to talk about them as people, not as just some objects. In addition, in these years that I've been doing this job, I also contacted high-level decision makers a few times, and I will tell you about 2 examples. In 2015, when we had this huge refugee crisis in Europe, and part of the flow of people literally walked through Slovenia, nearly 1 million people in 2015-16, and we are a 2 million state. There were very opposing reactions by the public, just as Jens said previously. One large part showed solidarity and empathy and helped the refugees with clothes, food. There were many volunteers at the border and also on the way. Even the police assisted in this new situation in a way that was mostly exemplary, and for most of the times. They sometimes even carried children from burnt out or injured parents, which was seen on the public TV. I was very surprised at the time to see this. One other part of the public expressed themselves with hate speech on the social media. At the time it was anonymous, but later with full names. And hate speech on the media, also on the social media, also against people who show solidarity, unfortunately continues. So when in March 2016, when the refugee pressure continued massively, I felt it necessary in my capacity as an R2P focal point to write a letter to the Prime Minister, reminding him of our commitment to implementing R2P to make sure human rights of refugees are observed at all times on the territory of our country, and also to propose a constructive approach to all debates and mechanisms within the EU in order to ease the tragic situation of these people. I concluded my letter with an expectation that I expect all public and state officials in our country will do their jobs in accordance with the European and civilizational values and solidarity, which we have shown also during the rescue on the Mediterranean Sea, when our then only military ship took part in saving lives upon the request of Italy. So there already was solidarity shown by our country. And, you know, I said, well, let's continue this also, this huge flow. So if I skip a few years, I can tell you another such story. In December 2019, after seeing the suffering of refugees who were barefoot and blocked in snow in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the situation in a camp called Vučjak, I wrote to the then new EU Commissioner for Crisis Management, Janez Lenarčič, who happens to be a Slovene and my colleague from previous life, with my messages to urgently ease the situation of these people. And I was happy to see an immediate reaction by the EU, by him, and also by Dunja Mijatović, the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the Council of Europe. Unfortunately, then they eased the situation, but unfortunately the situation of refugees in Bosnia who tried to reach the EU is not systematically solved, and there is huge suffering of these people there. In preparation to this conference, I also requested the Government Office for the Support and Integration of Migrants, which exists for a few years now, and includes the Asylum Center in Ljubljana and in Postojna, to share information about their practices and some challenges. And this is what they told me. Some good practices are, for instance, the identification of vulnerability. So prior to lodging an application for international protection, a doctor reviews each applicant and provides an opinion on vulnerability. So the doctor's opinion is given to the psychosocial service, which adequately reacts according to standards operating procedures to prevent and intervene in the cases of sexual violence and gender violence. Prior to lodging an application for international protection, the asylum seeker is informed about his rights and obligations and about the procedure for granting international protection. This is translated into their own language. So huge efforts have been done to find adequate translators. If any sign of vulnerability is revealed during the information interview, the public official in the process of lodging an application is informed about it. And if necessary, the public official alerts medical and psychosocial services and fills out a form stating the accommodation and health issues. So the identification continues through the entire process of obtaining international protection. So this is a good practice. Another one is about the standard operative procedures for prevention and action in cases involving sexual and gender-based violence. The Ministry of Interior, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and different non-governmental organizations signed a new revised agreement called Standard Operating Procedures to Prevent and Intervene in the Cases of Sexual Violence and Gender Violence. And an expert working group was formed based on the agreement with a view of planning and implementing necessary assistance for persons who are victims of this. So when a member of a working group receives the information, he or she presents the case to other group members, and this is followed by a discussion in the preparation of an action plan for assistance, counseling, and treatment. So the plan contains risk assessment, security plan, finding safe accommodation, advocacy plan, legal aid, and other forms of assistance such as psychotherapeutic assistance, professional and psychosocial counseling, participation in workshop for personal growth and empowerment, partnership, leisure time activities, individual help, and referral of the beneficiary to relevant institutions for assistance and support. Another good practice is called Project PATS. It means identification of potential victims of violence, which conducts informative interviews with all vulnerable categories or potential victims of trafficking of human beings, sexual violence and gender violence. Information is provided to all women, including unaccompanied and unaccompanied minor girls from 15 to 18 years, and to every applicant based on a proposal of a public official who recognizes the potential elements of trafficking or violence. The aim of this project is raising awareness and encourage persons who in most cases do not recognize the dangers and consequences of the trafficking and sexual and gender-based violence to take an active part in preventing various forms of exploitation through an appropriate approach. Another good practice is accommodation of unaccompanied minors, which are accommodated in a student hall of residence in Postojna. This is about 50 kilometers from Slovenia. It's a project that was recognized as an example of good practice and was extended until the establishment of a new institutional arrangement with a separate center for early treatment of unaccompanied minors. In this way, the principle of the best interest of a child and care for special needs of unaccompanied minors can be respected and implemented. The unaccompanied minors also benefit from a 24-hour professional care, and in this accommodation they can easier integrate and socialize with other children. They also go to school, of course, in that very city. I mean, school is not organized extra for them, but we try to integrate them into normal school system. There is also a psychiatric assistance. A psychiatrist is present in an asylum center once a week, and in collaboration with various NGOs provides applicants with further psychosocial care activities for overcoming a variety of their problems, because we know most of these people have trauma and consequences of trauma, and this needs to be addressed. Of course, I also asked about the challenges, and as Slovenia, and they told me the following: Slovenia is a transit country for most migrants and refugees. They all want to reach Germany or Sweden or some other Western country, UK also. So persons leave the country very quickly, and it's therefore not possible to extend psychosocial assistance or create safe spaces for them, because they leave before these procedures are done. And even for those who stay, social workers find it difficult to motivate them for a variety of activities like overcoming cultural differences and cooperation in taking responsibility for their own lives. It's difficult for them to take over new roles, overcoming trauma and resisting abuses, including chemical and non-chemical abuses. So it's difficult work for the social workers, they say, but they remain motivated.
Thank you, Blanka.
Yes.
That's great. I'm just aware that time's ticking, so I wanted to pass on to...
Maybe I can later tell you some more about the civil society's engagement, but let me finish here, because there's a lot of civil society engagement too.
That would be fantastic, thank you. So let's move from Slovenia to Germany, and I'd be interested to hear from Jens about the elections that have been taking place within Germany in this last week, which will spell the end of Angela Merkel's time as Chancellor. So Jens, in your view, do you think that the results from the German election, how do you think these will shape German and also wider European responses to refugees and migrants?
Yes, thanks a lot for this question. I will try to answer it really quick. Yes, I didn't want to sound too critical regarding the German engagement, of course, earlier. Like Merkel leaves a huge legacy, and to very, very briefly interpret the things to expect from the next German government. Right now, the coalition talks have not even started. Most likely, they are going to be between the Social Democrats, the Green Party, and the FDP, which is the Liberal Party in Germany. And basically, from a human rights perspective, I would say overall the electoral result is good news. The right-wing party, the Alternative for Germany, has been weakened. It's still around 10%, but of course, it will not join any government coalition either way. And all the parties that are likely to be involved in the next government are very progressive and human rights oriented in their approach, both to R2P and both to asylum law. especially the Green Party, which is most likely to head the German Foreign Office. But again, this is still kind of vague, but they have a very strong position on R2P. They want to strengthen R2P and mass atrocity prevention according to their electoral program. And there are also a lot of different proposals of the involved parties on how to coordinate and strengthen coordination of policy between different ministries in Germany. And I think that this is quite important also on a European level to coordinate different policies better. And for example, with view to Germany, like we can't, it's hard to understand how we, on the one hand, can still possibly return Afghans to Afghanistan, while at the same time in the foreign, like this is part of the work of the Ministry of Interior, but at the same time diplomats in the Foreign Office, especially those located in Afghanistan, are already starting to worry about or at which point they might need to get evacuated. So we need to work together strongly and way inside of Germany, also inside of the European Union. There are concrete plans for that, so I would expect some movement in that direction. And regarding to asylum law, really quickly, which falls under the Ministry of Interior, which might be headed by the FDP, the Liberal Party. There are some recommendations, for example, to strengthen Frontex, but which might be problematic, but also to have Frontex take over sea rescue operations, and in a honest way, like to stop people to enter suffering in the Mediterranean Sea. And if Frontex doesn't do it, to support NGOs doing that. Yeah. So the next German government is going to be very active on these issues. I expect, like I'm very optimistic. That's not usually my thing. But yeah, in regard to what's Germany influence and how far this might influence the European Union or other states, I'm not so certain. Of course, that's. There are a lot of member states in the European Union. Germany is only one of them. And there are strong member states who have different opinions on these issues. So yeah, you'll have to see.
Great, thank you very much, Jens. So that's really good to get your insights from kind of, 3 different states within Europe. We're fast running out of time. So just as a kind of final question, if each of you would like to just highlight kind of one recommendation that you would make for how governments should respond to refugees and migrants within the European region. So just in a few sentences each, so perhaps less than a minute each, just as a kind of final reflection to wrap up with. So Nazek, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. So my recommendation would be when we are dealing with the human beings, there's only one approach, really, a humane approach. An approach based on human rights. This is the only approach. But also, Europe and all European governments need to engage with migrants in decisions about how they are treated and about their needs in Europe. I think you can't keep excluding them and treating them like commodities. You need to listen to them and engage them in decisions about their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazek. And then let's move to Blanca.
Yeah, well, the government should, in the case of EU, fulfill the EU recommendations on promoting and operationalizing the R2P by EU and EU member states that they have already agreed. And of course, these recommendations could be extended to all European countries and broader, as they're logical and helpful. As agreed and in line what was agreed in 2005 on the highest level by all UN member states. And I would here add also the government should closely cooperate with NGOs and supports the efforts of the civil society, because the huge number of national and international NGOs have shown empathy, solidarity, respect of human dignity, and many interesting paths how to solve problems, and have sometimes, and in some places, also done so much more than governments to protect the most vulnerable people on the move. So they should work hand in hand. This is a huge problem and has to be addressed accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Jens, if you want to have the last word.
Yes, then I would add to these points that it's important to not only pay lip service to abstract norms, but to ensure that they are implemented in practice, to have national strategy or national institutionalization of atrocity prevention or prevention of identity-based violence in place, to ensure the policies are very coordinated, and that you have clear responsibilities for this.
Great, thanks very much, and thank you for being concise with those last comments. That's great. So we've reached 4 o'clock, so I think we need to end the session. But there's obviously a lot more that could have been said on this topic, but it was great to hear your insights that we did manage to squeeze in. So let's finish. I'll just finish by thanking our 3 guests. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you also to the audience for logging in from wherever you are. And we'll look forward to more of these sessions. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.